You used to be a trophy, Selina. Now you just look heavy." The laughter that followed those words echoed through the silent restaurant like a gunshot. Chad didn't just break her heart. He tried to crush her spirit in front of everyone she knew, mocking the very body that was secretly nurturing a life he knew nothing about. He thought he was discarding a broken woman. He had no idea he was insulting the mother of the most dangerous heir in the city, and he certainly didn't know that the man sitting in the dark corner booth, the one gripping his whiskey glass until it shattered, was the only person in New York who could snap his fingers and make Chad disappear. This is the story of how a cruel mistake cost one man everything and gave a forgotten woman the world. The clinking of silverware against fine china usually sounded like music to Selina's ears. It meant the dinner rush at Le Lumière was in full swing, and the tips would be decent enough to cover next month's rent on her shoebox apartment in Queens. But tonight, the noise felt like a headache tightening behind her eyes. Selina adjusted her apron, feeling the fabric pull tight across her midsection. She was only 4 months along, but the baby was already making its presence known. She wasn't showing enough for it to be obvious pregnancy, just enough to look in the uncharitable eyes of society soft. "Table 4 needs a refill on the Pinot," her manager distinctively unhelpful barked as he walked past. "And tuck your shirt in, Selina. You look sloppy." Selina bit her lip, tasting iron. "Yes, sir." She grabbed the water pitcher and headed toward table 4, keeping her head down. She was trying to be invisible. She needed this job. After the abrupt end of her last relationship and the sudden terrifying realization that she was bringing a child into the world alone, invisibility was her safest armor. But fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. "Oh my God. Is that Selina?" The voice was high-pitched, nasal, and painfully familiar. Selina froze the condensation on the silver pitcher, making her palms slick. She slowly looked up. Sitting at the best table in the house, the one by the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking Central Park, was Chad. And he wasn't alone. Draped over his arm like an expensive accessory was Tiffany, a girl Selina had known since high school, the kind of person who weaponized compliments. Chad looked different than he had 3 months ago. He was wearing a tailored navy suit, his hair gelled back in that aggressive Wall Street style he loved. He looked successful. He looked happy. "Chad?" Selina managed her voice, barely a whisper. "Babe, look who it is." Tiffany giggled, smacking Chad's arm playfully. "It's your ex, the one who, you know." Chad turned his eyes, scanning Selina from her messy bun down to her sensible black work shoes. His gaze lingered critically on her waistline. A smirk curled the corner of his lip, a look Selina used to mistake for charm, but now recognized as pure arrogance. "Wow," Chad said, not bothering to lower his voice. "You've really let yourself go, haven't you, Soph?" The restaurant was buzzing, but to Selina the room went dead silent. Heat rushed to her face, burning her cheeks. "I'm working, Chad," she said, trying to step away. "Can I get you some water?" "No, seriously," Chad continued, leaning back in his chair, playing to the audience of Tiffany and the nearby tables. "I mean, we broke up, 12 weeks ago? You must have gained 20 pounds. Comfort eating because you miss me." Tiffany covered her mouth, failing to suppress a snort of laughter. "Chad, stop your being mean. Maybe she just likes carbs." "I dodged a bullet," Chad declared loudly, picking up his wine glass. "Imagine if I was still stuck with that. You got fat, Selina. It's actually tragic. You used to be a trophy. Now you look like you gave up on life." The cruelty was so casual, so easy for him. Tears pricked Selina's eyes, hot and stinging. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell him why she had gained weight. She wanted to tell him that while he was busy buying stocks and dating mean girls, she was fighting morning sickness in the bathroom of a subway station, terrified of how she was going to afford diapers. But she couldn't. Not here. Not to him. "Enjoy your dinner," she choked out, turning on her heel. She rushed toward the kitchen, her vision blurring. She didn't see the busboy coming around the corner with a tray full of dirty dishes. Crash. Plates shattered. Half-eaten risotto splattered across the pristine floor. Selina slipped on the sauce, landing hard on her knees. A collective gasp went through the dining room. "Smooth, Selina," Chad called out from his table, laughing. "Graceful as a cow." Humiliation washed over her, thick and suffocating. She tried to stand, but her knees were shaking too badly. She felt a hand on her arm, not the manager who was likely storming over to fire her, but a firm, steady grip. "Careful." The voice was deep, bearing a texture like gravel and velvet. Selina looked up. Standing over her was a man she hadn't noticed before. He had been sitting in the VIP booth in the far back, the one usually reserved for politicians and A-list celebrities. He was tall, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than Chad's entire car. His dark hair was swept back, and his eyes, steely grey and terrifyingly intense, were locked on hers. He didn't look at the mess. He didn't look at the staring crowd. He looked only at her, and then with a jolt of electricity that stopped her heart, she recognized him. It had been one night, 4 months ago. A masquerade charity gala she had catered. She had slipped away to the balcony for fresh air, feeling out of place among the Manhattan elite. He had been there smoking a cigar, looking like a king, surveying a kingdom he despised. They had talked for hours. He never gave a name, just a mask, and a voice that made her forget her troubles. One thing led to another. A hotel key, a night of passion she thought only happened in romance novels. And then he was gone. Now he was here, pulling her up from the floor as if she weighed nothing. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low. I'm fine," Selina stammered, wiping risotto off her apron. "I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't mean to disturb your evening." The man didn't let go of her arm. His gaze shifted, snapping across the room, like a whip landing directly on table 4, on Chad. Chad's laughter died instantly. He didn't know who this man was, but human instinct recognizes a predator. And the man in the charcoal suit was an apex predator. "Who is that?" the man asked Selina, his tone dangerously calm. "Nobody," Selina whispered, terrified of causing a scene. "Just my ex. He seems to have a lot of opinions about your appearance," the man noted. He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a pristine white handkerchief, and gently wiped a smudge of sauce from Selina's cheek. The intimacy of the gesture made the entire restaurant hold its breath. "He's an idiot," Selina said, pulling away slightly. "Please, I need to go clean up before I get fired." The man turned back to her, and for a second, the ice in his eyes melted. He looked down at her stomach, just a glance, barely perceptible. But Selina felt seen in a way she never had before. "You won't be fired," he said. It wasn't a reassurance. It was a statement of fact. "You don't know my manager," Selina said with a weak, watery smile. "And you don't know me," he replied. "I am Lorenzo Moretti." The name dropped like a bomb. Even Selina, who avoided the news, knew the name. The Moretti family owned half the construction firms in the city, the shipping docks, and arguably the politicians. They were old money, dangerous money, Mafia money, if the whispers were true. and he was the father of her baby. Before she could process this, Lorenzo turned and began walking toward table 4. His strides were measured lethal. The air in the room grew heavy. "Sir," Chad squeaked as Lorenzo stopped at his table. Chad tried to summon his bravado. "Can I help you?" Lorenzo didn't speak. He simply picked up the bottle of expensive wine Chad had ordered, a 1998 Chateau Margaux, inspected the label, and then poured the entire bottle onto Chad's lap. Tiffany screamed. Chad jumped up, his expensive suit ruined. "What the hell is wrong with you? Do you know who I am?" "I don't care who you are," Lorenzo said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room without him ever raising it. "But you seem to have a problem with the lady's weight." Lorenzo stepped closer, towering over Chad. "She is carrying life. You are merely taking up space. If I ever hear you speak to her, or any woman like that again, you won't just lose your suit." "Do you understand?" Chad, pale and trembling, nodded frantically. Lorenzo turned back to Selena. He didn't smile, but he nodded a silent promise of protection. Then he tossed a stack of $100 bills onto Chad's soaked table, enough to buy the restaurant, let alone the wine, and walked out the front door. Selena stood amidst the broken plates, her hand instinctively covering her belly. The father of her child had just defended her. But as the adrenaline faded, a new fear set in. Lorenzo Moretti wasn't a hero. He was a kingpin, and he had just noticed her. If he found out about the baby, Chad's insults would be the least of her problems. The morning after the incident at La Lumière, the sun rose over Queens with a dull grey apathy that matched Selena's mood. She sat at her small, chipped laminate kitchen table, staring at the termination notice on her phone. It hadn't even been a face-to-face conversation. Mr. Henderson, the manager who had barked at her for months, had simply sent a text at 2:00 a.m. "Due to the disturbance caused during your shift and the unwanted attention brought to the establishment by your personal associations, your services are no longer required. Your final check will be mailed." "Unwanted attention?" Selena scoffed, rubbing her temples. "That was a polite way of saying a Mafia don threatened a customer because of you, and we don't want to get blown up." She was unemployed, pregnant, and her rent was due in 4 days. She stood up, walking to the small mirror in the hallway. She lifted her oversized t-shirt and looked at the curve of her belly. It was unmistakable now. The fat Chad had mocked was a hard, round bump. She placed a hand over it, feeling a fierce wave of protectiveness. "It's just us, little one," she whispered. "We'll figure it out." She spent the morning applying for every job she could find, receptionist, data entry, dishwasher. But by noon, nausea hit her like a freight train. She spent an hour on the bathroom floor, clutching the porcelain, reminded violently of her condition. When the nausea passed, a heavy knock on her apartment door made her jump. Selena froze. She didn't get visitors. Chad didn't know where she lived. He had refused to visit her slum apartment when they were dating. It could be the landlord come to harass her for the rent early. She crept to the door and peered through the peephole. Her breath hitched. Standing in the dim hallway of her walk-up building was a mountain of a man. He wore a black suit that strained against his shoulders, and he filled the entire frame of the peephole. It wasn't Lorenzo. It was someone scarier. "Miss Selena Miller," the man's voice boomed through the wood. "Open the door. We know you're inside." Panic flared. Had Lorenzo sent a hitman? Did he think she was a liability? "Go away!" she yelled, backing into the kitchen, grabbing a dull steak knife from the drawer. "I'm calling the police." "The police won't help you, Miss Miller," the man replied calmly. Mr. Moretti requests your presence. He does not like to be kept waiting." "I don't care what he likes," she shouted, her hands shaking. "Tell him to leave me alone." There was a silence, then a sigh. "He told me you would be stubborn." Suddenly the lock clicked, not forced but unlocked with a key. The door swung open. The landlord stood behind the large man, looking terrified and clutching a thick envelope of cash. "I'm sorry, Selina," the landlord stammered, avoiding her eyes. He bought the building 10 minutes ago." Selina dropped the knife. It clattered loudly on the linoleum. What?" The large man stepped inside, dwarfing the tiny room. "Mr. Moretti owns the building now. Technically, he is your landlord, and he would like to discuss your lease terms in person." He gestured to the open door. "Please, Miss Miller, do not make this difficult. The car is downstairs." Selina realized she had no choice. Lorenzo Moretti wasn't a man you said no to. He was a force of nature. She grabbed her coat, wrapping it tight around her midsection to hide her bump, and walked out. The ride to Manhattan was silent. They sat in the back of a black Maybach with tinted windows. The leather seats were softer than her bed. Selina stared out at the city, her mind racing. Why? Why go to these lengths for a one-night stand from 4 months ago? Unless he knew. They pulled up not to an office building but to a private residence on the Upper East Side, a limestone townhouse that looked like a fortress. The large man, whose name she learned was Bruno, escorted her inside. The interior was a blend of modern minimalism and old-world power. Marble floors, Renaissance paintings, and a silence so deep it felt heavy. Bruno led her to a study at the end of a long hall. "Wait here." He closed the heavy oak doors, leaving her alone. The room smelled of mahogany and expensive tobacco. One wall was entirely glass, overlooking a private garden. Behind a massive desk sat Lorenzo Moretti. He was reading a file. He didn't look up immediately. Selina stood in the center of the room, feeling like a schoolgirl called to the principal's office, or perhaps a prisoner before a judge. "You're hard to find, Selina," Lorenzo said, finally closing the file. He stood up. Without the chaos of the restaurant around them, he seemed even larger, more imposing. "You changed your number. You moved to a borough I usually avoid." "I wanted a fresh start," Selina said, her voice steady despite her fear. "Is that a crime?" "It is when you disappear without saying goodbye," Lorenzo said, walking around the desk. He moved with a predatory grace. "That night at the masquerade, it meant something to me. I thought it meant something to you." Selina's heart hammered. It had meant everything to her, but she knew they were from different worlds. "It was a fantasy, Lorenzo. Real life isn't like that. You're you. And who am I?" He stopped 3 feet from her. "You're the man who buys apartment buildings just to get a meeting," she retorted. A faint smile touched his lips. "I am a man who gets what he wants, and yesterday when I saw you on that floor, I realized I never stopped wanting you." He reached out his hand, hovering near her face. Selina flinched instinctively, stepping back. She wrapped her arms around her stomach again. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. He was observant. Too observant. His gaze dropped to her arms, crossed tightly over her midsection. He looked at the baggy coat she refused to take off, despite the warmth of the room. "Why were you fired, Selina?" he asked, his tone shifting. "Because you caused a scene," she snapped. "My manager was afraid of you. I will fix that. I will buy the restaurant if I have to." He dismissed it as if it were nothing. "But that is not what I am asking. Yesterday that insect Chad said you had gained weight. He mocked you. He's a jerk. Selina looked away. He is. Lorenzo agreed, but he was right about one thing. You have changed. He took another step closer. You are glowing, Selina. But you are also pale. You smell like peppermint oil, something my sister used to use for nausea. Selina stopped breathing. Lorenzo's grey eyes locked onto hers, searching, calculating. And when I look at the timeline, 4 months. It has been exactly 4 months. The silence in the room stretched thin and brittle. Selina. Lorenzo's voice dropped to a whisper, dangerous and soft. Take off the coat. No, she said, backing up until she hit the edge of a leather sofa. Take off the coat. It wasn't a request. Trembling, Selina unbuttoned the coat. She let it slide off her shoulders. Underneath, she wore a simple cotton dress that clung to her shape. There was no hiding it now. The swell of her belly was undeniable. Lorenzo stared. The ruthless Mafia boss, the man who made grown men weep, looked completely struck dumb. His gaze traced the curve of her stomach, his expression unreadable. Shock. Anger. He slowly fell to his knees in front of her. Selina gasped, pressing her back against the sofa. Lorenzo, please. I can explain. I was going to handle it. I didn't want to trap you. I know men like you. You have lives, you have arrangements. I didn't want to be a problem. A problem. Lorenzo repeated, his voice hollow. He reached out his hand, trembling slightly. He didn't touch her skin, just hovered his palm, inches from her belly, feeling the heat radiating from her. You thought my child, our child, would be a problem. He looked up at her, and the intensity in his eyes burned her. It wasn't anger. It was a fierce, terrifying possession. Who else knows? He demanded. No one, she whispered. Just me. And, well, Chad guessed I was fat. He doesn't know. Lorenzo stood up abruptly, the moment of vulnerability gone, replaced by a cold, tactical fury. He walked to his desk and pressed a button on the intercom. Bruno, get the car ready, and call Dr. Aris. Tell him to clear the west wing of Mount Sinai. I want a full workup, now. Lorenzo, wait, Selina protested. I don't need a hospital. I'm fine. You are carrying the Moretti heir, Lorenzo said, turning to her. His face was set in stone. You are no longer just Selina Miller from Queens. You are the most important person in my city, and God help anyone who tries to touch you. He walked over and grabbed her hand, pulling her gently but firmly toward the door. You are not going back to that apartment. You are staying here, where I can see you. I'm not your prisoner, Selina cried. No, Lorenzo said, opening the door. You are my family, and in my world, that is a much more dangerous thing to be. The next 3 days were a blur of luxury and confinement. Selina was installed in the master suite of the townhouse. She had a team of maids, a private chef who cooked specifically for her cravings, which were currently spicy pickles and vanilla ice cream, and a security detail that followed her even when she went to the garden. Lorenzo was gone during the days, fighting a war she didn't understand. But every night he returned. He would sit by her bed sometimes, just watching her sleep, sometimes reading to her. He was treating her like a fragile glass doll that had already cracked. It was suffocating. I need to go out, Selina said on the 4th morning, sitting at the long marble dining table. I need to get my things from my apartment, my clothes, my mother's locket. Lorenzo didn't look up from his espresso. Bruno has already retrieved your belongings. They are in the walk-in closet. That's not the point, Lorenzo. Selina slammed her hand on the table. You can't just keep me here. I have a life. You had a life of scrubbing tables and being insulted by boys in cheap suits, Lorenzo said calmly. Now you have this. I have a cage, she shot back. A gold one, but it's still a cage. Lorenzo sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He looked tired. Selina, there are things you don't understand. My family. We have enemies. If they find out about you, about the baby, you become a target. A pawn. Then why keep me? She asked softly. Why not let me go somewhere safe, Idaho, or Kansas? Lorenzo looked at her, his eyes dark. Because I cannot breathe when you are not near me. The confession hung in the air. Selina felt a blush rise to her cheeks. Before she could respond, Bruno entered the room, looking grim. Boss, we have a situation at the gate. Lorenzo's face hardened instantly. Who? It's the ex-boyfriend, Chad Kensington, and he brought a lawyer. Selina's blood ran cold. Chad. How did he find me? He didn't find you, Lorenzo said, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. He found me. Stay here. No. Selina stood up. He's here because of me. I'm coming. Selina. If I'm going to be the mother of a Mafia heir... Lorenzo. I can't hide behind you forever, she said, lifting her chin. It was a bluff. She was terrified, but she needed to assert some agency. Lorenzo looked at her with a flicker of respect. Stay behind, Bruno. Do not speak unless I say so. They walked out to the front courtyard. The iron gates were closed, but through the bars, Selina could see Chad. He was wearing a neck brace, likely a dramatic prop, and standing next to a short, sweating man with a briefcase. When Chad saw Selina, his eyes widened. Then a sneer appeared. I knew it, Chad shouted, pointing a finger. I knew you were hooking up with him. That's why you got fat, isn't it? You're knocked up by this criminal. Lorenzo signaled to the guard to open the gate. He walked out, stopping 5 feet from Chad. The morning sun glinted off the gun holstered beneath Lorenzo's jacket, visible only if you knew where to look. Mr. Kensington, Lorenzo said pleasantly. I thought we had an understanding. That was assault, Chad's lawyer squeaked, stepping forward. You ruined a $5,000 suit and caused emotional distress to my client. We are suing for damages, and now that we know you're harboring her, the lawyer gestured vaguely at Selina. We know she has information on your illegal activities. We'll go to the press. It was a shakedown, a clumsy, stupid shakedown. Chad had realized who Lorenzo was, and instead of running, his greed had made him bold. He thought he could blackmail a Moretti. Lorenzo laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was dry and terrifying. You think you can threaten me? Lorenzo asked. I know you don't want the cops looking into why you're keeping a pregnant waitress hostage. Chad smirked. Pay up. $5 million. And I forget I ever saw her. Selina felt sick. Chad was selling her out. He didn't care about her. He just saw a payday. Lorenzo looked at Selina. You see, this is the man you wasted years on. Then Lorenzo turned back to Chad. The temperature in the courtyard seemed to drop 10 degrees. Bruno, Lorenzo said softly. Bruno stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. No, Selina said. Everyone froze. Lorenzo looked back at her. Selina? Selina stepped out from behind Bruno. She walked down the steps until she was face to face with Chad. She saw the greed in his eyes, the weakness. You're pathetic, Chad, she said. And you're a whore. Chad spat. Smack. The sound echoed off the limestone walls. Selina had slapped him, hard. Her hand stung, but it felt electric. Chad stumbled back, clutching his cheek. "You?" "I am carrying the son of Lorenzo Moretti," Selina announced, her voice ringing out, clear and strong. She placed a hand on her belly, channeling every ounce of courage she had. "And if you ever come near this house, or me or my child again, I won't let Lorenzo handle you." She leaned in, close her eyes, flashing. "I'll kill you myself." Chad stared at her. He had never seen this Selina. The trophy was gone. The waitress was gone. In her place was a mother protecting her young. He looked at Lorenzo, who was watching Selina, with an expression that could only be described as awe. Then he looked at Bruno, who was smiling unpleasantly. "Let's go," Chad muttered to his lawyer. "This isn't worth it." They scrambled back into Chad's sports car and peeled away tires screeching. Selina stood there, her chest heaving. The adrenaline crashed and her knees went weak. She swayed. Lorenzo was there instantly, catching her before she fell. He scooped her up into his arms, bridal style. "You," Lorenzo murmured into her hair as he carried her back toward the house, "are absolutely magnificent." "I hate violence," Selina mumbled into his chest. "Could have fooled me." Lorenzo chuckled. But as they crossed the threshold, the mood shifted. A black sedan pulled up to the curb where Chad had just left. The window rolled down. A woman sat inside. She had platinum blonde hair, sharp features, and was wearing sunglasses worth more than Selina's life. It was Isabella Moretti, Lorenzo's estranged aunt, the one person in the family who wanted the throne for her own son. She lowered her sunglasses and looked at Selina in Lorenzo's arms. She saw the belly. She smiled. It was a smile of a shark scenting blood. The car drove away slowly. Lorenzo hadn't seen her, but Selina had. A chill went down her spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. Chad was a nuisance, but that woman was a predator. "Lorenzo," Selina whispered. "Hush now," he said, kicking the door shut behind them. "You need rest. The stress is bad for the baby." He didn't know. The real danger wasn't the ex-boyfriend. It was the family reunion that was about to happen. The name of the woman in the car was not Isabella, a name too soft for a woman made of iron and venom, but Octavia. Octavia Moretti. She was Lorenzo's aunt, the sister of his late father, and the woman who believed the Moretti empire was her birthright, stolen by a nephew she considered reckless. For 2 weeks, the townhouse was peaceful, but it was the peace of a held breath. Selina's belly had grown. At 5 months, she was undeniably showing. The morning sickness had faded, replaced by a restless energy. She spent her days reading in the library or pacing the garden, always under the watchful eye of Bruno. Lorenzo was trying to be a normal partner, or at least his version of it. He came home early. He rubbed her feet. He spoke to her stomach in Italian, promising the unborn boy the world. It was intoxicating. For the first time in her life, Selina felt cherished. But the bubble had to burst. "The Winter Solstice Gala," Lorenzo announced one evening, tossing a heavy cream envelope onto the coffee table. "It is the biggest event of the year for the families. The commission expects me to be there." "Okay," Selina said, looking up from her book. "So you have to go." "We have to go," Lorenzo corrected. Selina froze. "Me? Lorenzo, look at me. I'm pregnant. Me. I don't know how to talk to these people. I don't know which fork to use for the salad versus the fish. You know more about hard work and dignity than any of them, Lorenzo said fiercely. And you are the mother of my son. It is time they see you. If I hide you, they will think I am ashamed, or worse, that you are a weakness to be exploited. If I put you on my arm in front of the cameras under the lights, you become untouchable. You become a queen. The logic was sound, but the terror was real. The night of the gala arrived. A team of stylists descended on the townhouse. They put Selina in a gown of deep emerald velvet that stretched comfortably over her bump, turning her pregnancy into a statement of fertility and power rather than a condition to be hidden. Diamonds were draped around her neck, heavy, cold stones that Lorenzo said belonged to his mother. When she walked down the stairs, Lorenzo stopped breathing. He wore a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He took her hand and kissed the knuckles. "Remember," he whispered as they got into the limousine, "you bow to no one." The venue was a Gilded Age hotel in mid-town. The paparazzi flashbulbs were blinding as they exited the car. Lorenzo kept a protective arm around her waist, guiding her through the shark tank. Inside the ballroom was a sea of expensive silks and fake smiles. As soon as they entered the room, went quiet. All eyes were on Selina's stomach. The whisper network ignited instantly. "Lorenzo!" A voice cut through the murmur. Octavia Moretti approached. She was a striking woman in her 50s, wearing silver silk that made her look like a knife blade. She had a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Aunt Octavia," Lorenzo said, his tone polite but guarded. "You've been hiding away, nephew," Octavia said, leaning in to kiss his cheek. Then her predatory gaze shifted to Selina. "And this must be the mystery woman." "This is Selina," Lorenzo said firmly. "My partner." "Charmed," Octavia said, extending a hand. Her grip was like a vice. "And I see you've been busy. A bastard heir. How modern." Selina felt the insult like a slap. But she remembered Lorenzo's words. "You bow to no one." "He won't be a bastard," Selina said, her voice steady. "He will be a Moretti, and he will be loved. That's more than some people in this room can say about their own children." Octavia's eyes widened slightly. She hadn't expected the waitress to bite back. Lorenzo suppressed a smirk. "We should find our seats." Dinner was an ordeal. Selina was seated next to a corrupt senator's wife who asked invasive questions about her background. Selina navigated them with the grace she had learned, waiting tables, deflecting, smiling, keeping the water glasses full. But Octavia wasn't done. Halfway through the main course, Octavia stood up and tapped her champagne glass with a spoon. The room fell silent. "A toast," Octavia announced, her voice projecting effortlessly. "To my nephew, Lorenzo, and to surprise guest. It is so refreshing to see the Moretti bloodline continuing." She paused, looking directly at Selina. "Although one must wonder about the purity of the lineage." Octavia continued, her tone dripping with false concern. "I recently heard a distressing rumor. A young man named Chad Kensington. I believe he is an associate of yours. Selina was telling people that when you two were together, well, let's just say he wasn't the only one." A collective gasp ripped through the room. Octavia was publicly implying the baby wasn't Lorenzo's. It was a declaration of war. Lorenzo slammed his hand on the table, the cutlery rattling. He stood up, his face thunderous. "Octavia." "Sit down, Lorenzo," Selina said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was authoritative. She placed a hand on Lorenzo's arm, guiding him back to his seat. Then she struggled to her feet. The velvet dress caught the light. She looked regal. "Octavia," Selina said, addressing the older woman across the room. "I know you are worried. Change is scary, especially when you've spent your whole life hoping your nephew would fail so you could take his place." The room went dead silent. "Chad Kensington is a man who mocks women for their weight and tries to blackmail people," Selina continued, her voice gaining strength. "He is a liar and a coward. If you choose to listen to him, that says more about your judgment than my virtue." She picked up her glass of water. "Lorenzo knows who the father is," she said, looking down at the man who was looking up at her with pure adoration. "And when my son is born, he will have his father's eyes. And hopefully he will have my heart. Because if he ends up with a heart like yours, Octavia, I would feel very sorry for him." She took a sip of water and sat down. For 3 seconds, no one moved. Then the Don of the rival Genovese family, an old man who respected strength above all else, started to clap. Slowly. Then others joined in. Octavia stood there humiliated in her own court. Her face turned a blotchy red. She sat down abruptly, signaling for more wine. Lorenzo leaned over to Selina, kissing her temple. "I think I'm more afraid of you than I am of the FBI." "Good," Selina whispered, her hand shaking under the table. "You should be." But as the applause died down, Selina caught Octavia's eye. The older woman wasn't defeated. She was staring at Selina with a cold, dead look. The social assassination had failed, which meant the physical one was coming next. The high of the gala lasted exactly 24 hours. The next evening, Lorenzo received a call. There had been an explosion at one of his construction sites in New Jersey. 3 men were dead. It was a crisis that required his immediate presence. "I have to go," Lorenzo said, pacing the bedroom while packing a bag. "It's a mess. The unions are going to riot." "It's a trap," Selina said, sitting on the edge of the bed. She felt a deep, primal wrongness. "Lorenzo, don't go. Send Bruno. Send anyone." "I can't. If I don't show my face, I look weak. And after last night with Octavia challenging me, I cannot look weak." He strapped his gun holster on. He grabbed Selina's face in his hands. "Bruno will stay with you. The house is a fortress. I will be back before sunrise." He kissed her hard, a kiss that tasted of goodbyes, and left. The house fell silent. Selina tried to sleep, but the baby was kicking up a storm. Around 2:30 a.m., she went downstairs to get some warm milk. She walked into the kitchen and stopped. The back door, which led to the servants' entrance, was ajar. A chill raced through her blood. The alarm hadn't gone off. "Bruno," she called out softly. No answer. She crept toward the hallway where Bruno usually sat guard. She peeked around the corner. Bruno was slumped in his chair. A half-eaten sandwich was on the plate next to him. He wasn't dead. She could see his chest rising and falling heavily. But he was deeply unconscious. Drugged. Selina's hand flew to her mouth. Someone was inside. And since the alarm was off and the dog hadn't barked, it was someone with access. She heard footsteps on the floor above. They were heading toward the master bedroom. They were coming for her. She couldn't run out the front door. The gate required a code she didn't know, and the guards outside might be compromised too. She was trapped in the fortress. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but then the baby kicked again. A sharp jab to the ribs. "Move it," seemed to say. "Move, or we die." Selina kicked off her slippers. She needed a weapon, but she hated guns and didn't know how to use one. She needed to disappear. She ran not to the exit, but to the laundry chute in the hallway closet. It was narrow, designed for linens, but Selina was small, and despite the bump, she thought she could fit. She heard heavy boots thumping down the stairs. "Check the kitchen," a voice growled. It wasn't Octavia. It was a man's voice, a hired gun. Selina opened the chute. It was dark and smelled of detergent. She took a breath, prayed to whatever god listened to single mothers, and slid inside. She tumbled down the metal slide, hitting the sides, trying to protect her stomach with her arms. She landed with a muffled thump in a pile of dirty towels in the basement laundry room. She scrambled out of the pile, gasping. Her ankle throbbed, but she could walk. The basement. It connected to the old coal tunnels. Lorenzo had mentioned them once, a relic of 1920s rum running. He said he had sealed them up, but maybe... She limped toward the back of the basement behind the massive furnace. There, behind a rack of wine, was a small rusted iron door. She heard the door to the basement open upstairs. "She's not in the bedroom. Check the basement." Selina pulled at the iron handle. It was stuck. She grit her teeth and pulled with all her weight, adrenaline surging through her veins. With a screech of metal on metal, it gave way. She squeezed through into the damp, dark tunnel, just as a flashlight beam swept across the laundry room. She pulled the door shut, wedging a loose brick against the handle to jam it. She was in total darkness. "Lorenzo," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Where are you?" She felt her way along the cold stone walls. She walked for what felt like moles, the damp air chilling her to the bone. The tunnel eventually sloped upward, ending in a grate. Selina pushed up. It was heavy, but it moved. She climbed out and found herself in the middle of Central Park, hidden by a cluster of bushes near the reservoir. She was out. She was alive. But she had nothing. No phone, no money, no coat, just her silk pajamas and a pair of socks. She shivered violently. She couldn't go to the police. Lorenzo owned half of them, and Octavia likely owned the other half. She couldn't go back to her apartment. She needed to go where no one would look for the mistress of a billionaire. She walked. She walked for 40 blocks, sticking to the shadows, ignoring the pain in her feet. She walked all the way to Hell's Kitchen, to a 24-hour diner called the Rusty Spoon. It was a dive, the kind of place where truckers and insomniacs went. She pushed open the door. The smell of grease and stale coffee hit her. Behind the counter was an older woman, with hair dyed a violent shade of red, and a cigarette dangling from her lip, even though smoking was banned. Her name was Marge. She was the one person who had been kind to Selina when she first moved to the city years ago. Marge looked up, squinting through the smoke. Her eyes widened as she saw Selina shivering, dirty, pregnant, and wearing silk pajamas that cost more than the diner. "Holy Mother of Mary," Marge muttered, dropping her rag. "Selina, help me, Marge," Selina croaked, swaying on her feet. "Please, I have nowhere else to go." Marge didn't ask questions. She vaulted over the counter with surprising speed for a woman of her age. She caught Selina just as the darkness finally took her. When Selina woke up, she was in a small room above the diner that smelled of bleach and old paper. She was tucked into a lumpy bed. She sat up, panic flaring instantly. "The baby. Still cooking." Marge's voice came from the corner. She was sitting in a rocking chair, knitting something yellow. "You were out for 12 hours, kid. Dehydration and exhaustion." Selina slumped back against the pillows. "I have to leave. They'll find me." "Who's they?" Marge asked. "The mob. The CIA, or just a bad ex." "The mob," Selina said honestly. Marge didn't blink. Figures. You always did have terrible taste in men. He's not terrible, Selina defended Lorenzo instinctively. He's complicated. But his family wants me dead. Well, Marge said, standing up and tossing the knitting aside. Then we better make you disappear properly. She walked over to a dresser and pulled out a box of hair dye. Jet black. First things first, Marge said. Goodbye, honey blonde highlights. Hello, goth waitress. Selina touched her hair. It was a small sacrifice. Do you have a phone, a burner? I need to know if he's alive. I got a phone, Marge said. But you can't call him. If they're tracking him, they'll find you in 10 seconds. I don't want to call him, Selina said, her eyes hardening. She remembered the gala. She remembered the look on Octavia's face. I want to call the one person who hates Octavia Moretti as much as I do. Marge raised an eyebrow. And who is that? The man who clapped for me, Selina said. Don Salvatore Genovese. It was a suicide mission. Calling the head of the rival family. But Selina knew something about power now. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And if Lorenzo was in a trap or hurt or worse, believing she was dead, she needed an army. Give me the phone, Marge, Selina said. I'm going to start a war. The meeting took place in the back room of a funeral home in the Bronx, the only neutral ground Marge could secure. Selina sat on a velvet chair, her dyed black hair pulled back severely, wearing a leather jacket that strained over her belly. She didn't look like a terrified waitress anymore. She looked like a woman preparing for war. The door opened, and Don Salvatore Genovese walked in. He leaned heavily on a cane with a silver lion's head handle, his eyes scanning Selina with skepticism. You have courage, child, Salvatore rasped, sitting opposite her, calling me on a burner phone, telling me you have a proposition. I don't have a proposition, Don Genovese, Selina said, her voice steady. I have a warning. A warning from the girl who spills risotto. From the mother of the Moretti heir, Selina corrected him sharply, placing a protective hand on her stomach. Octavia Moretti tried to kill me last night. She drugged my guards. She sent hitmen into Lorenzo's home. She broke the code. Salvatore's amusement vanished. The code. The unwritten law that women and children were off limits was sacred. To attack a family home without a formal declaration was an act of madness. Octavia is ambitious, Salvatore grunted, but she is desperate. She knows my son secures Lorenzo's legacy. If she kills me, she takes the throne. And once she has it, do you think she'll keep the peace with you? She'll burn this city to the ground. Selina leaned forward, playing her final card. Lorenzo is walking into a trap in Jersey right now. He thinks I'm safe. He's distracted. If he dies, you get Octavia as a neighbor, a woman with no honor. Salvatore tapped his fingers on his cane, calculating. And what do you want, protection? No. Selina stood up. I want a ride. I need him to see I'm alive so he can fight with a clear head. You want to walk into a shootout pregnant? Salvatore looked at her like she was insane. I want to save the father of my child, she said fiercely. And if you help us, the Moretti family will owe you a debt that can never be repaid. Imagine that, Don Genovese. Lorenzo Moretti owing you his life. It was a massive gamble appealing to his ego rather than his mercy. Salvatore smiled, revealing gold-capped teeth. Get the car. The construction site in Jersey was a killing field. Rain lashed down on the skeletal maze of steel beams, turning the dirt into a quagmire. Lorenzo was pinned down behind a stack of cinder blocks, his suit ruined and his shoulder bleeding. His men were outnumbered, trapped by snipers on the high ground. But his mind wasn't on the bullets chipping away the concrete inches from his head. It was on the silence from his phone. "Octavia!" Lorenzo roared into the darkness. "Face me!" A laugh echoed from the finished second floor. Octavia stepped out onto a steel beam, flanked by mercenaries. She looked down at him with pure disdain. "You were always too emotional, nephew," she shouted. "Playing house with that waitress made you soft. If you touched her," Lorenzo yelled, standing up despite the danger, "I will tear you apart. Oh, don't worry about her." Octavia sneered, her voice cutting through the storm. "My men paid her a visit. She won't be needing maternity clothes anymore." The world stopped. A coldness worse than death spread through Lorenzo's chest. Gone. Selina the baby. His vision blurred. A roar of primal grief tore from his throat. He raised his gun, stepping out into the open. He didn't care about cover anymore. He wanted to die, and he wanted to take her with him. "Goodbye, Lorenzo." Octavia signaled her men to fire. Screech! Blinding headlights swept across the site. A convoy of black SUVs smashed through the chain-link fence, drifting into a defensive semicircle between Lorenzo and the shooters. The doors flew open. Dozens of men in trench coats poured out, guns raised. They bore the insignia of the Genovese family. Octavia's men hesitated. They hadn't signed up for a war with the rival family. The back door of the lead SUV had opened. Don Salvatore stepped out, and helping him was a woman in a leather jacket. Lorenzo blinked, wiping rain from his eyes. He thought it was a hallucination born of grief. But then Selina stepped into the light. She looked up at the steel beam, where Octavia stood, frozen, placed a hand on her belly, and shouted, "I'm still here, Octavia, and I'm still fat. Deal with it." Lorenzo's knees buckled. She was alive. "Don Genovese," Octavia shrieked, her composure cracking. "This is Moretti business." "It became my business when you broke the code," Salvatore shouted back. "Killing a Don is business. Killing a pregnant mother that makes us all look like animals. You are done, Octavia." Octavia looked at her mercenaries. "Shoot them. Shoot them all." Her men looked at the Genovese army. They looked at Lorenzo, who had regained his focus and looked more lethal than ever. Slowly they lowered their weapons. They weren't paid enough to die for a losing cause. "No!" Octavia screamed. Snapping, she pulled a pistol from her coat and aimed wildly at Selina. Bang! A single shot rang out. Lorenzo stood there, his gun smoking. Octavia gasped, dropping her weapon. She looked down at her shoulder where blood bloomed on the silver silk. She stumbled back, slipping on the wet beam, and fell with a splash into the mud, below broken but alive. Silence descended. Lorenzo didn't look at his aunt. He holstered his gun and sprinted across the muddy ground. Selina met him halfway. He crashed into her, falling to his knees and burying his face in her stomach, sobbing, the King of New York weeping in the rain. "I thought I lost you," he choked out. "You can't get rid of me that easily," Selina whispered, stroking his wet hair. "We have a son to raise." Lorenzo looked up, his eyes red and fierce. "Yes, we do." He stood and nodded to Salvatore, a gesture of profound respect. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Salvatore grunted, retreating to his car. "Thank the girl. She's got more stones than your whole council. Treat her right, or I might just adopt her myself." As the cars pulled away, Lorenzo wrapped his jacket around Selina. "Let's go home," he said. "Yes." Selina smiled, leaning into him. "But can we stop for burgers first? I'm starving." Lorenzo laughed, a sound of pure relief. "We can buy the burger joint." 6 months later. The winter thaw had revealed a vibrant central park mirroring the new life Selina had built. She sat on a bench, gently rocking the pram, where Alessandro Moretti slept wrapped in cashmere. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was the matriarch of the city's most powerful family, her fear replaced by a quiet, regal strength. Lorenzo joined her, handing her a coffee. "He's finally asleep." "Out like a light." She smiled. With Octavia serving a life sentence and the Genovese alliance holding strong, they were finally at peace. They were the king and queen, simply enjoying their kingdom. Then a shadow fell over them. A jogger in a stained grey tracksuit slowed to a halt, panting heavily. It was Chad. Life had been cruel to him. He looked aged, defeated, and poor, a stark contrast to Selina's glowing radiance. "Selina," Chad stammered, eyeing the expensive pram and the lethal man beside her. You look great. I heard you got married." Selina met his gaze, feeling nothing but pity. The anger was gone. "I did. Thank you." Chad shifted awkwardly, intimidated by Lorenzo's icy protective stare. He seemed on the verge of asking for something, forgiveness perhaps, or a loan, but he lost his nerve. "You should keep jogging, Chad," she said softly, turning her attention back to her coffee. "It's good for the heart." It was a total dismissal. Chad nodded quickly and vanished into the crowd, a mere footnote in a story he could no longer touch. "You were nice to him," Lorenzo noted, kissing her hand. "I have everything," Selina replied, gazing down at her son. "Why kick a man who has nothing?" Lorenzo smiled, pulling her close as the sun began to set. He was right about one thing, though. "You did get heavy." "Excuse me," she laughed. "Heavy with life," he whispered, resting his forehead against hers. "And I am the lucky man who gets to carry you both." And that is the incredible story of Selina and Lorenzo. From a humiliated waitress on a restaurant floor to the queen of the New York underworld, Selina proved that true strength isn't about size or status. It's about the courage to protect the ones you love. Chad thought he could break her with cruel words, but he only pushed her into the arms of a man who saw her true worth. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are just the doorways to our greatest destinies. Karma doesn't always come with a punch. Sometimes it comes with a happy ending that your enemies have to watch from the sidelines. If you enjoyed this story of romance, revenge, and redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. What did you think of Selina's transformation? Would you have forgiven Chad, or did he get off too easy? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new drama. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.